Welcome to Ladies Talking Love, Season 3, Episode 12, From Coping to Connection. It's Ladies Talking Love, a community of women uncovering more joy and fulfillment in sex, as we learn from experts and amazing women like you. Together, let's create a world where women's sexuality is celebrated and understood, beginning with our own. I'm your host, Ariel Finlinson. Let's talk love. I am really excited for you to hear this episode today. Even though it is focused around pornography use, there are so many golden nuggets about how to talk with your kids about healthy sexuality and what type of coping mechanisms you might use when you have emotions that you don't want to feel, and how to lean into discomfort to really deepen your connection and have the type of relationship that you want to have. There are so many great things that are talked about in this episode. So even if you might not feel like you have a big desire or need to learn about pornography use, I think this episode is for you and you're going to go away mind blown, because that's pretty much how I feel right now. Dr. Cameron Staley is a clinical psychologist who is passionate about helping individuals improve their mental and sexual health. In his Tedx talk, Changing the Narrative Around the Addiction Story, Cameron shares details from his research and counseling experience regarding helpful ways to talk about sexuality and how to effectively reduce unwanted pornography viewing through acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. To make these principles more accessible to those who are struggling with pornography, he developed the Life After Pornography online program and the Life After Pornography coach app. Cameron also provides online coaching services for individuals seeking additional support in applying the mental and sexual health principles found in the Life After series program. You can check out his podcast, interviews, research, and free trainings all on his website, which I have linked in the show notes. But before jumping in, I have to tell you about something that I'm stoked about. So maybe you've heard I'm in the process of creating my first online course, and it's coming together so well. I'm so excited, and I know that it's going to be a great resource for you to really dive into some of the topics that we cover on the podcast, but in a way that is broken down and that you can really start to implement these things into your life and work on some of the things that you struggle with around sexuality. But before the course goes live to the public, I'm going to give everybody on my email list the first chance to grab a huge discount on the course. Like, it's going to be cheaper than I will probably ever sell it again. So if you're not on my email list, there are a couple of ways that you can join it. I've posted several links in the show notes. And if you click on those links, it'll take you to a page where you can subscribe for a freebie. And when you do that, you'll automatically be put on my email list and you'll get that freebie right to your inbox. Or the second option, you can hop onto Instagram and DM me the word blueprint, BLUEPRINT, and a message will walk you through how to sign up for one of those freebies to get on my email list. The number of courses that I'll be selling at this price is limited. It's going to be first come, first serve, so you don't want to miss the chance to be the first to jump on it. The email with details about this offer is going to come into your inbox tomorrow. So if you haven't gotten on my email list, this is your chance, because you don't want to miss this deal. It is killer and way cheaper than it'll ever be again. So don't miss it. Get on the email list and I'll give you all the details tomorrow. But without further ado, let's talk love. I'm super excited to welcome Dr. Cameron Staley onto Ladies Talking Love. Thanks for joining me, Cameron.
It's so great to be here with you.
I am so excited to talk about pornography today, which sounds weird to put those two words together, but I really am, because from my background in my faith tradition, this is a really, I would say, triggering word for me.
Yeah.
Like, hear the word pornography and suddenly it's like, heart is racing. I feel so scared. I've loved learning from you and the research that you've done and in your work counseling with couples. Just to kind of start us off, can you define pornography for us?
Yeah, I wish. I think legislators have been trying to define that for decades, and There's always I think that notion of, well, when you see it, you know it, what it is. For me, I found that labels are pretty unhelpful. And pornography is one of those, addiction's one of those, betrayal trauma. Those labels kind of obscure what's really going on. So for me, a really simple definition I use for pornography is it's sexual images. That's it. And that could be lots of different things. That's pretty broad, but often when people say, oh, I struggle with pornography, they are struggling with viewing sexual images. So that's about as simple as I can think about it. But I found that that language is a lot more helpful to navigate this problem.
Yeah. And I like that a lot because there's a lot of variety to what I think sexual images could include. Would you say for different people, a sexual image would be a different thing? Or would you say that sexual images are usually pretty similar for most people? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it's so variable. So I've worked with folks who say, oh, I'm struggling with porn. It's like, okay, tell me a bit about what you're looking at. And it's like, well, I look at uh, ads for swimsuits. And it's like, okay, that shows up in the mail. Most people wouldn't consider that pornography or erotic or even sexual. It's just women's bodies wearing a swimsuit. But some people would view that as pornography, is seeing a catalog for Target. Others would say, no, sexual images are people engaging in sexual acts. Others would say, oh, it's any nudity. But I think bodies are quite divine, and there's just so much beauty in bodies. And bodies in and of themselves do not need to be sexual. We often put that on there, and we often sexualize women a lot more than men, but bodies are wonderful gifts and creations. In and of themselves, they don't have to be sexualized. So I think a lot of this is based on the associations we have and our intention for the images and how we're using them, but it is really variable on what people consider pornography.
I feel like I've thought a lot about just how, especially in faith traditions where bodies, we do view them as divine, but we also have these other cultural influences that come in and are like, cover up your body, or like, you're going to make people sin, especially if you're a woman, like, and you're not covering up, and suddenly these images that aren't meant to be sexual can be, because we see bodies more as just sexual and like arousing versus the beautiful bodies that they are. And so that is so interesting, probably depending on where a person's coming from, they're going to view the images differently. Is that what you've found and kind of what you're saying?
Absolutely. And you're already naming the origins of a struggle with porn. And I think it goes back all the way to the Garden of Eden, that one of the first things the adversary attacked was feel bad about your bodies.
Yeah.
They are shameful. You need to cover them up. There's something dangerous and wrong and sinful about them. And that didn't come from God. That was not a heavenly message. That was the first thing that Satan attacked. And then we do grow up feeling like, oh gosh, something is wrong about my bodies. I should cover it up. And we can't talk about bodies, and I feel really insecure. And so then when these children grow up, they have a lot of curiosity about bodies, but it's like you don't really see bodies because we can't walk around. Like, we gotta stay covered up. I remember that growing up. It's like I never really saw my parents unclothed, maybe my dad sometimes.
Yeah.
But now it's like all my kids get ready in our bathroom in the morning and I'm in the shower, and they probably see me unclothed every day because they don't care that dad's in the shower. And I think that is so healthy to recognize that, yeah, dad's just taking care of his body, taking a shower. It's a body. Like, this is okay. This is not a shameful thing we need to conceal. And so I think you just grow up being comfortable. Oh, we have bodies, and like, people have genitals. Those are just part of bodies. And that just really helps with that normal curiosity. But if you live in an environment where you don't have that, you're going to search for it.
Yeah.
And often people find those sexual images because they're curious about bodies. And then they find sexual images and it's like, oh, wow, there's some arousing feelings, some desire that I don't really know what that is, but that feels really good. But since we don't talk about this, this must be a shameful thing.
Yeah.
Kids are really smart that if we don't talk about it, it must be bad.
Yeah.
And this feels really good, but I must hide it. And if I like something that's really bad, I must be really bad. And so often the roots of a porn struggle begin there in childhood, and often begin around discomfort around bodies and those messages that you shared about modesty, that it's women's responsibility to cover up because men are not responsible for their thoughts and actions. that message contributes to sexual assaults and rape culture, that men are not responsible, but women are responsible for men's thoughts and actions. Like, no, women's bodies are not pornography, and men are responsible for their own thoughts and actions. But we've shared this message that women are the gatekeepers and responsible for themselves and for men.
Yeah.
And that sets this really unworkable stage for struggles later on.
Yeah. And just like you were saying, even from childhood, it's so crazy how it can just spiral so quickly growing up with just shame around our bodies in general. And seen that just with my kids, I've tried so hard to be so open, and they have no shame to be naked at home. And sometimes I have to be like, we have to wear clothes outside though. Like when we go outside, we do have to put clothes on. But it's been great for them to see. And I think that was a big process for me, because I did see my parents naked sometimes, but like I didn't grow up in a family where that was really just a norm. And especially once I reached a certain age. But I hope with my kids, they can know like home is a safe place to ask questions about our bodies, to know what bodies look like in different stages, especially in families where like pregnancy, just like all the different stages of changing bodies with age and pregnancy and babies and all the things. And I think that is so awesome that we can help shift that just from childhood to make such a big impact. Why is pornography use, like I was talking about at the beginning, like just saying the word can be so scary in religious circles? What do you think that stems from?
Yeah, it's one of the scariest things. And I think for religious people, it might come down to that sexuality and creation and having families is so sacred and so important, where it's like, I cannot mess this up. There is so much pressure to get sexuality right because it is so significant and so central to so many belief systems. And so that's part of it. The other part of it is, and we're not going to give you any support or any education, and you're not allowed to learn or make mistakes or ask questions or have conversations. But this is the most important thing in life, but you can never mess it up. And we're not going to support you with it. And so I think that's it, where there's so much pressure.
Yeah.
And then the messages we get around sexuality are typically fear-based. And often the motivation behind fear-based messages is to try to encourage people to follow the rules. And we do that with our kids too. Like, don't go into the street, you'll get hit by a car. Like, don't touch that stove, you'll get burned. Like, these are scary, dangerous things. And those are fairly effective in keeping our kids off the streets and not poking things into the outlets. And we do the same thing with sexuality, that sex is dangerous. Don't go near it. Don't touch it. You'll get burned. You'll get hit. You'll get shocked. It's scary. And when you're a kid, you're like, okay, like I won't go near it. And then as you become an adolescent, it's like, oh, I'm having sexual feelings. I've never had this before, but this is the thing I was taught that was really bad and dangerous. Oh, it's happening. I can't go talk to mom and dad. I can't talk with church leaders. Oh no, I'm starting to notice people. I'm attracted to them. I've seen sexual images. I felt that arousal. I'm doing the very thing that I've been warned against my whole life. What is wrong with me? Am I wanting to rebel against God? What is so sinful about my nature? I'm going against everything I've been taught. And so I think that's a lot of it.
Yeah.
Because we're just not preparing people for development, that you will feel sexual feelings. This is normal. This is healthy. This is actually part of the plan. This helps us bond and have families. It's a wonderful thing. Instead, it is the thing that people are dreading and trying to avoid. And then when it shows up, it's like, I got to hide that.
Yeah. And not knowing what to do if you feel arousal or if you feel attraction. It's like, yeah. It was such a scary topic for me growing up. And I don't want it to be that for my kids. I want them to understand the beauty of sexuality and be able to come with questions and talk. As you've jumped in and kind of studied pornography, worked with people who struggle with pornography, what are some of the things that have surprised you?
Well, there's so many, because I only heard the fear-based messages and that if you view pornography, you'll be an addict for the rest of your life. And that's worse than a methamphetamine addiction, and you're going to abuse children and assault people, and you can never have a healthy marriage. And it's like, whoa, I am never looking at pornography. And I didn't. Like, that worked for me because I'm like, that sounds terrifying. But really where this journey started for me is I was in graduate school studying to become a psychologist, and I needed a research topic. And at that time, I wanted to work with couples and thought I need to learn more about sexuality. And I was sitting in church one Sunday, and someone from the pulpit was talking about how addictive pornography was and how destructive it was for relationships. And it wasn't until that moment that I wondered, what does the research actually say about pornography? I had never thought about that before. I'd only heard it was a terrible, awful addiction and you should run away from it. Like it's unsafe and dangerous and the worst thing you could get involved in. And so at that point, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go look at the research and see what it says. And this was about 15 years ago now. And I was really surprised that there wasn't a single research study demonstrating pornography was an addiction, like other substance use concerns. And I thought, well, this is strange. Like everybody knows this is an addiction. Where is the research? And so I decided to do the research myself and thought we have the technologies to look at if people viewing pornography have similar brain activity as those struggling with substance use. So we brought people into our laboratory and hooked them up to EEG and monitored their brain activity as they viewed sexual images. And at that time, I was pretty sure we'd be the first research group to demonstrate that pornography was an addiction, just like other substance use. And it's like, oh, it just hasn't been done. Let's do it. And we didn't find that. And I was really surprised. I thought, but this is all I've known. What I did find is folks that struggle with pornography while they're viewing experience increased negative emotions. So they're feeling more anxious or guilt or shameful or distressed. And so we learned that emotions play a major role in this. So it may not be similar to other substances neurologically, but emotions play a major role. But the challenge with this is the media gets a hold of our research and says, researchers disprove sex addiction. And that's not what we did. And that's not how research works. But they neglected our key finding that, hey, emotions are a big part of this because that's not sexy enough. It's like, it's an addiction. It's like, actually, emotions organize our actions. They drive our behaviors. That is what's underlying this. And we have great treatments for compulsive behaviors. And that's what seemed to be going on is people are feeling a negative emotion and then they engage in a behavior to get rid of it or control it. So if somebody's feeling lonely or sad or anxious or overwhelmed, if you view sexual images and masturbate, you feel better temporarily, but then feel shame and guilt after. So then it's like, well, let's view more porn and masturbate again. I'll feel better temporarily, and then I'll feel worse after. That's a compulsive cycle, and we have great treatments for that. The challenge is a lot of folks have been addressing pornography concerns as an addiction, and there isn't a single research study showing that addiction approaches are helpful for reducing pornography. And yet that's the language we use, and that's what people think about. And that framework is a big part of why people struggle for a really, really long time. But our mind doesn't recognize that. It's like, this just must be a really bad problem. Porn must be really addictive. But it turns out it's like, no, actually addiction is just not an effective treatment. With the right treatment, people can overcome this in a matter of weeks to months. This doesn't need to take years and years or decades.
Which is amazing because all growing up, that's all I heard too, is porn is so addictive. If you see it, it's just going to, be this landslide into not being able to control anything and just all of these things. And so I think your research is so eye-opening. And as you've worked with people to kind of look at this different way of looking at pornography use as a coping strategy for big emotions, what are some of the emotions that you've seen drive pornography use for a lot of people?
So there are a variety of them, but I'd say the major one is shame. So I think shame actually gets a bad rap. Shame is a complex emotion. Shame often shows up for us when we're under duress or under threat or have experienced abuse or trauma. And our first defense is let's fight against it or let's run away from it. Those are ideal. But if we're not able to do that, we tend to turn inward and collapse and shut down. And that's really the role of shame, where it's like we're kind of taught that, wow, your sexuality is dangerous and it is sinful and it is wrong. And so a lot of people fight against it for years and years or try to run away from it. You're just not able to do that. And so a lot of people end up shutting down. And shame is saying, you know what? Things are not safe. Things are dangerous. Just withdraw. Disconnect from people, disconnect from God, just shut down and withdraw. And so shame really is trying to protect us from dangers, but it's a danger that's kind of been culturally created, where sexuality isn't dangerous, but you can't run away from it or fight against it. So our only option is shame. And so we stay there for a long time, and shame is so overwhelming and so debilitating and so despairing that in an effort to cope with that shame, our body has learned that sexual experiences help us feel better. And so this research study was published within the last year that they found that folks that struggle with pornography, when they're feeling the emotion of shame, within a couple of hours, they actually have an increase in sexual desire. And that's in an effort to help cope with those profound feelings of shame. Because sex is designed to connect us with our bodies and with other people and its pleasurable feelings. So it gives people some relief and some connection. And then immediately after that, feelings of shame come back again. And so we get stuck in that. So shame is driving a lot of this. And then for a lot of other people, it's a host of uncomfortable emotions, from loneliness to sadness to anxiety to stress. Any of those emotions can be underlying this. Because really, pornography concerns, a more helpful way to look at that, it's just a way to avoid discomfort. It's just an unhelpful strategy in the long term, but it works pretty well in the short term. And if I'm feeling any of these uncomfortable emotions, I can move away from them in this moment. And your mind's like, hey, mission accomplished. I helped you feel better. But long term, it just is not an effective solution. And so emotions are a big part of it. But I've also seen a lot of people that struggle with pornography might have other mental health concerns going on, that they might struggle with ADHD, which it's difficult to regulate your attention, regulate impulses, manage emotions. And that can be one way they found to cope with those attention concerns is porn. And that ADHD never gets addressed because they're focusing on this addiction. Other folks, it's major depressive disorder or social anxiety, or there's PTSD or insecure attachments. I've worked with so many people on the autism spectrum that struggle with pornography. And autism's completely missed, where it's like, oh, we got to get rid of porn. These might be individuals that struggle with social connection and understanding conveying emotions. And they found pornography as a way to get some of those needs met. So pornography is a symptom. It is not the cause or the origin. These other things are typically driving that. But pornography is the scary thing. It's the nagging cough. And it's like, we got to get rid of that. But it's not the cold. It's not driving the symptom. So just like you wouldn't go to the doctor when you're sick and the doctor say, hey, I just want you to not cough this week and then you'll be all better. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you might need antibiotics, you might need rest, you might need chicken noodle soup. And when you address the underlying cold, the cough kind of goes away. And pornography is the same, but we get so stuck on, we got to stop the cough because that's scary. But really, that is a symptom that something else is going on.
And I think that's so interesting when you were talking about the shame would increase sexual arousal. That are there any studies that show the difference of like pornography use when that happens versus actual connection with a partner?
Yeah, so that is ideally how we would respond to shame. Is when we're feeling shame, we are disconnected and feeling unlovable. That is the essence of shame. And the antidote to that is connection.
Yeah.
And so if you have that increased desire and it's like, oh, I'd love to connect with my partner. Oh, that's really vulnerable. And what if my partner rejects me? Or, oh gosh, that is too scary. I'm going to go the safe route and have a sexual experience while I'm viewing sexual images. And so that is a complete risk-free way to connect, but it's not authentic and it's not genuine and it's not enduring. And so in my mind, it's kind of like, I'm feeling really hungry. You know, it would take a lot of effort to prepare a meal that would really sustain me. I'll just have a candy bar. It's like, yeah, candy bars do taste good and they are sweet, but they are not fulfilling. They are not nutritional. And for me, pornography is like a candy bar. It's like, yeah, it gives you a measure of connection. It took no effort and there's no risk, but truly connecting with your partner will be so fulfilling and help with that shame and that lovability. But for a lot of people, that vulnerability is so scary, or there's conflict in that relationship where it's like, I'm not even going to go there. And so they turn to porn and it maintains this problem because connecting in real life requires a lot of vulnerability and that is scary.
It is. And I feel like just seeing that difference using pornography when shame occurs or big emotions versus connection, that is the beauty of relationships, though, is the ability to connect. And I just think it's so interesting to look at pornography as a coping strategy and like a counterfeit, trying to fill this, which actually isn't going to fill it at all. But if you turn to your partner or a dear friend, if you're not married or whatever, like to be able to connect, that's going to leave you better than you were before. Whereas a
Yes,
lot of these counterfeits just like fill a void for a second. and then,
that's it.
and that's just so interesting that a lot of these coping strategies are from big emotions that come up. How do people who have grown up suppressing or rejecting these feelings and not really being able to recognize their emotions, how can they start? Because I've noticed that a lot, especially with men. It's just in our culture, like
Yep.
boys don't cry, don't, like don't feel sad, whatever. And just these ways that we interact even with different genders.
Yep.
And how can people start to recognize their feelings? Because I think, would you say that some people don't even know what feelings are driving their coping strategy?
Oh, yeah, that's typically where people start. That is not on the radar at all. And we have at least a decade worth of research now showing that people that struggle with compulsive sexual behaviors score lower on levels of trait mindfulness, which means they're less aware of thoughts, they're less aware of emotions, less aware of urges. And then when those uncomfortable thoughts, emotions show up, they're more judgmental and critical of them. That is what's underlying a lot of these pornography concerns. And so I think one of the main reasons why we see men struggle with porn at disproportionately higher rates than women is because of that disparity in emotional awareness and comfort and just familiarity with I'm feeling stuff. This is sadness, or this is anger, this is despair. These are emotions. Women are socialized to develop a vocabulary and a comfort in sharing those. And that's a protective factor for not developing compulsive behaviors, where men are not. Like when I was becoming a psychologist, I thought something's broken. I don't know if I have emotions. Like I had four: good, bad, fine, and okay. And then I realized, like, wait, those aren't even emotions. Like I don't even know what's going on. And I struggled with that. I'm like, something's really wrong with me. But then over the years, I recognized I don't have language for this. And so if you're struggling with this, a great place to start is to just search for a list of emotion words and develop a vocabulary. And we found that simply labeling an emotion is an effective emotion regulation strategy. Just saying, what am I feeling? Let me look at this emotion wheel. Is this anger? I don't think so. Is it sadness or loneliness? Oh, this is fear. Oh, I am feeling afraid. Oh, yeah, this is what fear feels like. This doesn't feel good. But this emotion is information. It's just trying to communicate something to me. And so I think about emotions, they're like employees. And so sometimes employees are saying, hey, everything's going great, boss. Like, oh, great. Thank you, emotion. And other times it's like, hey, there's a fire in the kitchen. It's like, that's scary. But we want these employees. They're working for us. They're always communicating. And we don't want to control our employees or yell at them when they're telling us things, but we do want to manage them. We do want to listen to them. And so sometimes it's understanding that there is a reason for emotions and there's a benefit to having those. They actually help clarify our values. They're the source of connection. They're our desires and passion. Religiously, for me, I feel the spirit through emotions. And so when we're not as aware of emotions, sometimes we don't get those spiritual promptings as much. And so when you're always looking at sexual images to get away from emotions, we're often reducing spiritual influences in our life as well, because we're not able to hear those or feel those. And so it can be simple as let's slow down, maybe scan your body, notice thoughts. Let's practice labeling emotions and talk with other people about those. That's a great place to start.
Yeah. And I feel like just what you were talking about, not recognizing those emotions can limit our connection so much, because connecting through emotions and knowing a person's emotions and what they're feeling, their fears, their success, like that's how true vulnerability and connection occurs. And when we can't recognize those or have the vocabulary to share that, I feel like it limits our ability so much to connect. Would you say connection is probably one of the biggest antidotes to any coping strategy, right?
It is. Because shame is saying you're unworthy of love, withdraw. Connection helps you recognize people care about you and you're a human. And that connection helps reduce that shame. Shame cannot survive in the face of vulnerability and connection. It only thrives in darkness. And Brene Brown's work around that is just wonderful. But that's it. So the pathway through a compulsive sexual concern or pornography struggle is connection. It is increased awareness of emotion. It is feeling things and sharing those. And for a lot of people, it's like, well, I don't want to do that. Like, what else could we do to overcome this? And it's like, no, this is it.
This is it.
This is it.
Yeah. Yep. And there can be so much fear because there is always room for a possible rejection when you open up your vulnerability, even if it's someone you're married to. There is always that possibility, which to me actually lends to vulnerability the beauty, because there's more weight. When you are accepted, that connection is just so deep. But what would you say to people? Because that is really scary. And a lot of people are like, it's not worth that chance, which from my side, I'm like, no, take the chance, because what happens after is just so worth it. But what would you say to people to encourage kind of overcoming that fear?
I would say the life you want to live is just on the other side of discomfort. It's right there. And I often ask this question that, are you willing to risk rejection or to feel vulnerable if it gives you the life that you want? If it helps you overcome this struggle, if it helps you develop these relationships, are you willing to feel this discomfort? And it really does come down to that. And if they're like, nope, not willing to experience it, it's like, okay, well, you're going to struggle with these sexual behaviors, and this life you want, you're not going to be able to access that.
Yeah.
So are you willing to take this risk? Because the life you want is just on the other side. And that's the exciting thing. And the reason why this doesn't take years and years of work is the answer is just moments away. It's, am I able to feel these emotions and connect with other people and experience sexual urges without needing to make those go away as fast as I can by looking at sexual images and masturbating? You can have an urge. You don't have to obey it. And when we're aware of an urge, we can disobey it. So I have urges to check my phone all the time, especially when the notification goes off. It's like, I gotta check my phone. And when I'm not paying attention, I'll reflexively check it. And I obey urges all day long. But when I'm slowing down and more present and recognizing I'm actually in a conversation or on a walk, I have an urge to check my emails or my messages. I don't actually need to do that. And that's uncomfortable. It's like, ugh, I would rather just satisfy that urge right now and move on with my life. But you can have a sexual urge, or an urge to scratch your nose, or an urge to eat or to swallow or to look at sexual images. And when you're aware of that, that unlocks the power that you can disobey it. And you can make that choice of what you would like to do next instead of obeying these urges automatically.
And just like those urges, it's practice to be more mindful. I feel the same with vulnerability. Like it doesn't all have to happen in one big, great, wide-armed sweep. It's like, I'm going to share this one thing and see how that goes. And then I'm going to open up a little more. And I really like how those go together, just showing like these coping strategies take a lot of mindfulness to overcome them and to recognize them. And that's the same with vulnerability too. Like as you're recognizing and able to show a little bit and share a little bit, you can get more ability to be vulnerable, just like you can get more ability to not cope in unhealthy ways, which are maybe easier in the short term.
Yep, that's it. And I think about, even though I've been a psychologist for 10 years and know the power of connection and vulnerability, I still do not like to be vulnerable.
It's hard. I still struggle.
Yeah, it's unpleasant. That's why I like being the psychologist. Like my clients can be vulnerable and I can listen. I don't have to share. But I've recognized that, oh yeah, the pathway to connection and that depthness that I really value is vulnerability. So I'm willing to pay that price of admission because I know the benefits that I get. But I still don't enjoy pulling my wallet out and paying for vulnerability. It's unpleasant. But wow, the payoff is tremendous.
It's tremendous. And what would you say as people have understood this different view? Like wow, my pornography viewing isn't an addiction. It's a coping strategy. How have you seen that shift their view of themselves or their partner who struggles?
That is the game changer and the major pivot that people make. And so often people are stuck because they view the struggle as an addiction and they view themselves as an addict. And so that label starts to become affixed with their identity. And so you start to see that, oh, I'm actually not responsible for my actions. I can't choose these things. The reason why I look at pornography is because I am an addict, and that is what addicts do. And so that keeps people stuck for a long time. And there's a lot of shame associated with being an addict and a lot of fear. And so that label and that frame really doesn't generate a path forward. For a lot of people, it becomes an identity and people get really stuck. And so if you start to look at unwanted pornography viewing as an unhelpful coping strategy and recognizing this is probably a lot more about an emotional concern than a sexual problem, it's like, oh, there's things I can do about that if this is
Yeah.
an emotional concern. And you start to recognize that there actually may not be that many things true unique about pornography, that coping strategy is fairly interchangeable. We all humans engage in things to get away from uncomfortable emotions. So either we overeat, or we snack, or we scroll through social media, or we shop, or we compulsively exercise, or we play video games, or we turn to substances, or we view sexual images. They're all in an effort to control discomfort. And so for me, my go-to is not sexual images, it's treats. I go to the pantry when I'm feeling stressed or lonely, and I've recognized I'm not even hungry. I just want to feel better. I don't want to feel this. And so I'll go have another cinnamon gummy bear. But I shut the pantry door because I'm like, I've had a lot of these. And I don't want my family to see me. And I have even more cinnamon gummy bears. And I recognize this is exactly the same. I am feeling an emotion. I don't want to feel it. I engage in a behavior that I don't really enjoy. I'm not tasting these gummy bears. I'm just eating them as fast as I can to try to not feel something. And then I end up eating a lot and I never tell my partner about it. And it's a shameful thing. It's the same thing with viewing pornography. A lot of people over time recognize I feel so bad about viewing porn. I do it as fast as I can and I masturbate and I'm done. And I didn't enjoy it at all. There's no pleasure in that because it's compulsive. And so one way that can be helpful is recognizing you're not this awful deviant addict. You're a human. And your mind is really creative at finding ways to not feel things. And you found that sexual images work really well in the moment. Other people engage in other strategies, but they are the same. And so when you start to see that this is what humans do, not dangerous people, that starts to reduce that shame and you start to recognize, oh, there are emotions. Typically, an emotion precedes an urge to view porn. But people are not aware of that. It's like, no, I'm an addict. That's why. It's like, no, there's an emotion there that showed up right before. That's how this works. And so as you start to see that and increase awareness of those and slow down, now you have choices. When you're feeling lonely, yeah, you can get away from that emotion and view sexual images, or you can reach out to somebody. You can feel that emotion. You can have a conversation. You can connect. You have choices now. And that's all possible through mindfulness and slowing down.
And how would you say understanding that, especially if we're talking about a woman who struggles with pornography? Because this isn't talked about as much, that women do struggle with pornography. And you've mentioned that it can be a lot harder for women because this is often viewed as kind of a male issue. And so how does understanding this specifically help women who may be struggling?
Oh, that is so important. And I just felt that hit me so hard in my heart because I have worked with many women that feel like I am the only one. Growing up, I was taught never date a guy with this issue because this is a really dangerous thing. These are things that men struggle with. Be aware of the men. And growing up, it's like, but I struggled with this. I struggled with masturbation or I viewed pornography. And I was growing up and my female peers, they're kind of socialized that you're not sexual beings. And here I am having sexual desire and struggling with a men's issue. And there's just not a place to put this where it's like, what is so wrong with me that I'm struggling with this really dangerous thing that men struggle with? And so a lot of women, in my experience, carry even more shame. Where for a lot of men, it's like, yeah, this is a pretty common thing that men struggle with. It's not great. It's pretty bad, but there's a community. But for with women, it's like, there's no way I'm telling anybody about this. That's how it's framed, is this is something that men do, and women are going to have to be aware of it, and it's going to be really hurtful and a betrayal. But a lot of women struggle with this. And so when you start to recognize that the origin of this might be a way to cope with emotions, or there might be some insecure attachment styles going on, or this might be discomfort around vulnerability, or it might be that, hey, congratulations, you're a sexual being like everyone else on the planet. And there hasn't been a lot of great support or mentorship, and you found something that helped you, but also you didn't have a place to talk about this. That you're a lot more normal than you think. And there's other things going on, that this is an emotional concern, lack of education, lack of support. This is not an addiction. And so it gives you a better framework to understand this and address this and move forward.
Which I think is so important. One of my friends before this interview, I was asking her some questions. What would you have? And she's like, one thing is just women do struggle and it's not talked about. And so thank you, because it can be so hard when you feel like you're the only one.
Yep.
And because I think of that fear of pornography, especially for women, for the women who struggle, but then also on the other side, for women whose partner struggles, it feels devastating to hear that your spouse has been looking at pornography. It feels almost like they have cheated on you as a woman. What are some things that you would tell women as you've learned this different view and kind of understood this more as a coping strategy? Because for a woman, it's like, my trust is eroded in my partner. I don't feel safe anymore. Our sexual intimacy, I don't even want to touch that anymore because I feel so betrayed. What are some things that you've found to help women work through that betrayal trauma?
Yeah, you described that well. That's a really common reaction. And I would say a really valid reaction based on all the messages we get about sexuality and how dangerous it is for men and how women need to be on guard. That is a really common reaction. And so if you view a porn struggle as a sexual problem, you're probably going to have that reaction a lot more. If you view this as, oh, this might be an unhelpful coping strategy for emotions, this may not be a sexual concern. This may not be about you not being enough or being inadequate, or
because it is. Women are like, it's about me. My partner struggles sexually. I'm not good enough.
And that's where it goes. And that's where my heart goes out to, because I've worked with so many couples and so many women where this pulls at all the vulnerabilities and all the insecurities. And we've already socialized women to be insecure about their bodies from day one. That happens so early. And so you're already insecure and connection is difficult. And we don't have conversations around sexuality. And then you're taught growing up that you are responsible for men's actions based on how you dress. You are the gatekeeper for sexuality. And so when you get married, if your husband looks at pornography or cheats in some awful backward way, it's your fault.
Yeah.
You have failed somehow in that relationship. And that is such a painful, devastating message to take on. And so that's behind a lot of this. There's so much fear to discover that, oh, my partner looks at pornography. Oh my gosh, I learned that destroys marriages. Is my partner going to molest my children? Is he going to abuse me? Is he going to jail? How have I failed? Our relationship is over. How could I not be enough? That is where our mind goes. That is so natural, because that's the narrative we have around sexuality and about if there's any sexual problems in the relationship, it's the women's responsibility. It's not the men's. They can't be trusted with themselves. And so that sets up a really unhealthy dynamic. I think porn addiction is really unhelpful for the person struggling with porn, because it's really there to help you feel less shame, where it's like, oh, it's not my fault. Like, it's an addiction. But behavior is always in your control. And addiction suggests that it's not. And that's a really unhelpful framework. But I think calling yourself an addict helps you alleviate yourself from some of the responsibility, but it keeps you stuck. And betrayal trauma is really similar, where it's like, I'm feeling really scared. The only way that I can feel safe again is there's got to be a bad person. There's got to be a perpetrator. There's got to be somebody dangerous. And if I can label them as that, I feel safer again. but that's not a recipe for connection or moving forward or understanding or growth. But I see the draw to betrayal trauma where it's like, I am so overwhelmed and struggling so much. This validates that what I'm feeling is legitimate. This is real and it's intense and it's strong. But I've seen people just like engaging in addiction programs for years and years. I've seen women participate in betrayal trauma groups for years and years because you get stuck in that. And it might be a great first step that, oh, what you're feeling is real and valid, and this is really scary. Let's help you have a community. But it seems to keep people there and doesn't seem to help them move forward as well. So if I had my preference, I would retire addiction language. I would retire betrayal trauma language because there's actually not evidence for either as an effective treatment whatsoever. But I would say a more helpful term, and I'm still playing with this, is when you learn that your partner struggles with porn, I would call that discovery shock. You are learning something new that changes how you see your partner, your relationship, your future. And it is shocking. Just like you get hit by a car, you are in shock. You feel like this is so dangerous. We're injured. What is happening? Where did this come from? How do I bounce back from this? That shock from learning about this is really natural and fairly universal, I would say. It doesn't need to lead to years and years of trauma or feeling like a betrayal. But I think initially it is very shocking. And I think if we could talk about it in that way, it could be more helpful that what you're feeling is valid. Now let's understand why this is so shocking. It's like, why has my partner never talked to me about this? That would be really upsetting. You've concealed something from me. Let's understand that. And it could be that this person has felt so shameful about this that they've kept it in, or they didn't want to hurt their partner and they've kept that in. And by keeping it all in, it does hurt their partner. That is real. But it's coming from a place of, I don't want to make things worse. And so many times I've worked with men where it's like, if I share this, my partner will leave me and I will never see my kids again. I can't overcome this and I can't lose my family. I cannot share this. And for me, that's a really different reason from, I just like viewing porn. I don't really care if it hurts my wife. I just like it. It's like, oh, that's a really different reason.
Yeah.
And so one thing when you learn that your partner's viewing is understand the reason. If it's like, yeah, I'm interested in checking out other women and I kind of want to have other relationships and don't really care how it impacts you, that's a really different presentation than the last thing I'd ever want to do is hurt you. And I feel terrible about this and I don't know what to do. And I'm just trying to hide. That's a shame response. So understanding what is really going on. But I would say your emotions as a partner are always valid. And it might be less betrayal trauma and maybe purity culture trauma, where we hear all these messages around sexuality it's scary. And then your partner brings us into your relationship. And we can only point to the partner did all these awful, terrible things to me. But there's a whole culture around sexuality that set the stage for how devastating this feels.
I really like that discovery shock. I think that's a good way to put it. And especially going along with purity culture and the way sexuality is portrayed in the world, women are taught that sex is about how our bodies look, and that's it. And so we don't understand with a loving partner that it's about connection and love for us. And that is so devastating then when we hear about pornography use, or I've definitely heard women talk about too, that if their partner has used pornography, they bring ideas into the bedroom that they might not be comfortable with. What would you say to couples who are in that situation? Maybe they aren't looking at pornography anymore, but if you've seen it, sometimes you have ideas of what you'd like to try in the bedroom that might not be realistic, but you might not know it's not realistic because
That's a good point. And that's another kind of gap is there's no literacy around pornography. And so kids that are viewing this growing up where it's like, oh, I guess this is how relationships work, but it's not. So I think about just like if you love Lord of the Rings, that's fantasy. You don't solve your conflicts with a broadsword. This is Hollywood. These are actors, there's cameras and scripts. This is not how it works. Middle Earth is not a real place. This is a fantasy. And pornography is the same, that these are actors. There's a makeup crew, there's producers, there's film crew. This is not modeling connection. This is not modeling consent. This is fantasy. This is Hollywood. But without that understanding of what is it that I'm viewing, people can develop like, oh, I guess this is how it works. This is what men do and what women like. This is how it works. Pornography is not educational whatsoever. It's adult entertainment. It is not sex education. And so if somebody has viewed a lot of pornography and assumes that, oh, this is what people would enjoy or how it works, you need to have conversations. And so what I think is a really healthy rule is if you can't talk about it, you probably shouldn't do it. So let's have a conversation around our interests, our desires, our behaviors. Let's talk about it first. And maybe someone's like, oh, I never thought about that. Let's try that out. Or actually, no, that isn't arousing or interesting at all. Oh, okay. We need to have conversations around sexual interests and set some boundaries and have some shared values around those. But often we don't have any models for how to have sexual conversations. We feel so bad about it. So we start engaging in sexual acts with our partner because it's too uncomfortable to talk about it. And I say we got to slow that down. We got to talk about it first before we introduce those activities.
I like that rule a lot. And that brings in the vulnerability where the connection will happen too.
Yep.
Whether or not your partner's on board. I mean, that's just sex ed across the board. Let's talk about it, get on the same page, decide together what is going to work and what's okay for our boundaries right now. And they can change, all of those things. As you've worked with couples, I would love to have you talk a little bit about like couples who one of them may be struggling. How have you seen their relationship strengthened as they've worked through this struggle together?
And that's the beauty is people come in feeling like this is the absolute worst thing that could ever happen to me and my relationship and my life and my family and my future. And for many people, it is an opportunity to finally have conversations about your expectations, to actually put words to these fears you've had, to talk about the vulnerabilities, to develop open lines of communication. And this is what's really unfortunate is a lot of people don't have healthy conversations around sexuality until after they have a problem with pornography. And it's like, it doesn't need to be that way. Like having these conversations and learning how to do that can prevent struggles with porn. But too often the pathway to learn the skills to talk about sexuality is you have to struggle with some sexual behavior. And I wish that wasn't the case. And so for a lot of people, it is an opportunity we actually got to talk about the expectations we brought in and talk about some of these scary messages we've heard and all these fears we've had and that our desires and our interests and our difficulty with vulnerability. And for so many people, it has an opportunity to develop an understanding and compassion for each other and empathy and developing that perspective taking and really working together and growing together and developing together instead of saying, you're the perpetrator, I'm the victim, let's go to our corners, we'll never speak again, this is over. It has an opportunity to let's grow together, that porn isn't the issue. It's a symptom that showed up because we were not prepared to navigate this relationship and our own emotions and sexuality. Let's help each other do that. Let's learn together, get the support we need, but we're on the same team. And when you can collaborate that instead of you're the problem, that is a game changer. And I've seen so many relationships become so strong after this concern. And it does break my heart where a lot of people, a porn issue shows up and it's like, and we're done. I'm out. We're done. And it's like, oh, wow, this probably was a pretty good relationship to begin with. It could have been even better. And we ended it because that's the rule. If there's a porn issue, there's no coming back from this. You got to run away from it. We got to divorce. We got to separate. And if there's other things going on where there is abuse or somebody does not care about you and is abusive to you or cheating on you, there's lots of valid reasons for that. But just because there's an unhelpful coping strategy that somebody is using that likely predates this relationship, I would really encourage people not to hit the red button and be like, we're out. This could be an opportunity to strengthen your marriage in a way that you've never experienced.
I'm glad that you separated pornography use is very different if it's in a relationship where you're cared about and like wanting to overcome this together versus cheating and abuse and all these things. That's very different.
Yep.
And pornography could probably go along with someone who also is doing those other things, but it doesn't always.
Yep.
I also really like I think this brings up, even for people who aren't struggling with pornography in their relationships, any type of vulnerability that brings us together as a couple and makes us work through pushes us to get closer together. And I feel like seeing pornography as a coping strategy for emotions helps me see that a lot of other coping strategies that people are using, instead of scrolling on your phone or shopping, if you're maybe connecting with your person, the type of growth we can have in ourselves, even if the coping strategy isn't pornography, to notice those and use that as an opportunity to connect. And actually, when I listened to one of your other episodes and you were talking about this and the coping strategies, it just made me think that I think a lot of women may actually use the coping strategy of serving other people, which sounds really weird, but I feel like we have these big emotions. We maybe feel sad or lonely. And instead of taking an opportunity to sit with it and recognize it and reach out, we just suppress it and just focus on other people instead of the vulnerability. We're focusing on other people and doing things for other people, but we're not having a person that we're actually connecting with. And I feel like service can be a great thing. I'm not saying don't serve, but I think that first part of recognizing and feeling and connecting is so important. And it just made me think like, oh, I think that this is actually a coping strategy for a lot of women, because we've been trained to look after other people. And it's just like, okay, I won't think about myself then, and I'll just care for everyone else. And it was just a really interesting thought I'd never had before.
I love that. And it's reinforced in religious communities that that's a righteous thing.
Yeah.
And it is wonderful. The downside is if we're using that to avoid taking care of ourselves or feeling things, we're benefiting so many people and we're exhausted.
Yeah.
We're worn out.
And we're not having the connection.
No, exactly. But if it's like, oh, actually, there's an emotion here, I'm going to serve people and enjoy it and connect this and slow down and savor. Then it's like, oh, it's sustaining and fulfilling. The intention behind it really matters. And so I love that you're making that comparison. I'm thinking about my wife quite a bit. Like, she is so active in helping everybody. And sometimes it's easier to do that than attending to yourself.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing, but we don't view that as sinful.
Mm-hmm.
We view pornography as sinful, but the function is exactly the same. And so that's a really helpful framework for couples to recognize, oh, we all do this. I might not struggle with porn, but I serve others, or I turn to the cinnamon gummy bears like I do.
Yeah.
That I get this. This is something we all do. So relating to each other and recognizing can be really helpful. It's connecting. It takes away the shame, but it gets us side by side instead of on opposite ends.
And seeing that our coping strategies are more similar than we would have thought. And especially thinking about the serving one, I hadn't thought about this until now, but just when I've been in that situation before as a woman and just without taking care of myself or feeling my emotions, I felt completely drained. And I kept trying to find value by doing more instead of realizing that I need to say no sometimes, and I need to take time to connect and then be able to say yes to opportunities. And it can still be a sacrifice. It can still be a burden sometimes to serve, but like to be able to say yes and do it because I could say no, but I said yes instead is totally different. And I just think that's interesting looking at the two, like you can both just lose any type of care for yourself and be empty. And one seems really good and can be good. And the other isn't good, but if you switch it to connection and connecting with your partner, it can be really good.
Oh, that is so beautiful. And as you talk about that, initially you talk about, oh, pornography, all that fear, this is scary. I felt no fear as you talked about that. It's like, oh, that just makes sense. This is how people are. Oh yeah, let's be more aware of that. Let's be more understanding. Let's support each other. That's how we move forward with these concerns. But when we're like, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing ever, it compounds the issue and we get stuck.
Yeah.
But if we address it just like you addressed it, it's like, oh, this makes sense. Let's move forward. Like this concern starts to dwindle and diminish because this is a really natural human thing that we're all dealing with.
And we all have those coping strategies, which I like to talk about. Like, look at the similarities, see how they're so similar, what you're doing.
Yep.
As we're closing up, I would just love for you to share how you might suggest couples who are struggling with pornography to start their journey of recovery.
First of all, let's determine what the actual problem is. Is it that your partner is looking at sexual images? Is it that it's secret and they didn't share this with you? Is this a lack of connection? Are there external pressures like I'm afraid of what my family's going to say or my friends? Is there a fear of you being judged or your partner being judged? Is it bringing up insecurities that I don't feel good enough? Sometimes the emotions are so intense where it's like, it's so much like you just did this to me. Let's slow down and figure out what is the problem? Where is this going on? What is the fear? Let's start to have those conversations about this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm really afraid about. And then how you can show up for each other is as you're listening, validate each other. Emotions, by definition, are valid. They are responses to our environment and these beliefs that we have. We need to hear them. And when we're really scared, our amygdala is firing. And it's that fear center. And our frontal lobe, that's our good thinker, is offline. And so if we're getting really scared and anxious and not listening to each other, that amygdala keeps firing. And so that first step is to really listen to each other and validate each other's emotions. That there's a lot of fear here. There might be anger. There's hurt. Let's create space for those. That tends to calm that amygdala. And then we can think through this, where it's like, oh yeah, I guess I can relate to you as well. I don't look at pornography, but I do the serving other people, or I do the snacking like Cameron, or I do social media. Yeah, okay. And I have all these fears. Here's all the messages I heard growing up. This is what this is bringing up for me. And then I would say establish the kind of role that you want to play in your relationship. And too often we're taught that if somebody struggles with porn, you need to now be the parent for them, or you need to be the police, you need to monitor them. And the other person's the child, or now there's a perpetrator and there's a victim. And I would say you don't have to play those roles. I would choose roles. And for me, I prefer to be a partner or a companion or a friend or a nurturer or supporter. And so choosing these roles in the relationship that'll actually help you move forward instead of being your partner's accountability buddy. You don't need to parent or police. That erodes connection. That is not a helpful way to address this. And so being that companion, nurturer, supporter. And then as you're navigating this, balancing sharing your emotions and taking responsibility to regulate your own, that your partner's not making you feel hurt or your partner's not scaring you. These emotions are coming from within. Let's understand those, feel those. And for the other partners, let's be aware of those and be sensitive about, yeah, some of my actions contributed to you feeling these things. I understand that in that role. So really empathizing with each other and taking turns. This is what I'm feeling. It's like, oh, let me join you. I understand that. And so it is regulating your own emotions and sharing those, but also taking turns empathizing and connecting and listening and validating your partner. Those are the recipe for navigating this concern, overcoming shame, moving past this nasty porn cough, and building that really meaningful connecting relationship.
I love that. And I was just thinking, as couples, you covered some really great points there of making sure to share your emotions and to validate them and to take turns and to really kind of dig in and listen and hear where the other person's coming from. Is there anything else you would add that you've seen differentiates couples who are able to overcome this challenge together versus those who maybe can't or don't from their own choice or choice of their partner?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to how you frame it. If you view this is an awful addiction and I have been betrayed by you, I don't see either person grow a whole lot from that or develop or make progress. And so a lot of it is the framework. And then if we withdraw to our corners and listen to shame where, oh my gosh, I've hurt my partner, I can never be forgiven or connect again, or yeah, my partner's hurt me so much, I'm going to completely withdraw. If we withdraw, I don't know how we move forward. And so there is a balance with how do we open up? This is scary because I'm kind of mad at you and I'm kind of scared and this feels really uncertain. doing that is the path forward. And we may need to bring in a professional. We might need to work with a counselor or a relationship coach to say, this is so intense for us. We're not able to show up in the way that we would like. We need some support. We need some guidance. But that's the biggest thing, is if we get stuck behind these labels, because they are easier. I'm an addict and I've been betrayed. Okay, I don't have any responsibility for my feelings or actions anymore. That isn't a recipe for growth and development. And so we need to actually feel stuff and talk about it and take some safe risks. But we might need support from loving family and friends or church leaders or professionals that can navigate this well. But I would encourage people to approach this through treatments that have research support. And so around pornography concerns, there's actually only one treatment that has evidence that it's effective. And it's acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And the research that's been done is out of Utah State University, which is where you're at. And they found that folks with years of porn struggles are able to reduce their viewing over 90% within like 12 weeks.
Wow.
On average. It's incredible. So acceptance and commitment therapy works really well for reducing porn. There's also a great book called Act with Love, or Acting with Love. And it's an ACT-based approach for relationships. And it works really, really well for those couples. And then with that, I developed an online program called Life After Pornography that's based on ACT. And then I just launched an app called the Life After Pornography Coach that you can get on your smartphone that teaches all these ACT concepts. So you can walk through all these principles on your own or with your partner. Or if you are the partner, it's like, I want to understand this better. You can go through these as well. So there are so many resources. But I'd say if you want to work on this, I would select an approach that has evidence that it works. And addiction approaches and betrayal trauma approaches, they may help some, but we just don't have the evidence to say that it helps most or at the same degree as things like acceptance and commitment therapy.
Oh, I'm so glad you shared that. I was going to ask where they can find some of your courses. I'll make sure and link all of those in the show notes, that book, and then your app and courses that you mentioned. And where else can people find you if they want to learn more about your research and maybe work with you as a therapist? Do you do telehealth? Maybe you don't.
I do. Yeah. So yeah, I'm a licensed psychologist in the states of Idaho and Utah. So if you're residents in those states, I can work with you remotely. I do all my counseling online in this room. So this will be a familiar space. I do general mental health. I do a lot around sexual health, religious health, because what I found is religion and sexuality are often co-informing each other. And so it's rare that I have a conversation around sexuality that I don't also talk about religion. Those beliefs are often intersecting. So I have a lot of those conversations as well. And then I do relationship coaching around and sexual health coaching for those outside of those states. So I'm not able to address mental health concerns in a coaching setting, but I am able to for those in Utah and Idaho. So you can find me on Facebook and on Instagram. We have a YouTube channel. It's the Life After series, or you can just search for Cameron Staley. And on my website, I've got a lot of free resources, articles I've written, free trainings on how to overcome porn. I host a podcast to teach people more about ACT and healthy sexuality. I've interviewed a lot of experts out there and just put those out there. You can watch those videos on YouTube or listen to those podcasts on your favorite platform. I really, truly believe that with the right education and principles, people can overcome these concerns quickly. And so I want to make that as accessible and as affordable as possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been great to have you on today.
This has been delightful. I learned so much from you as well.
What did you think? I so wish that we could just sit and chat together after every episode. I want to hear all of your thoughts, and I wish we could just be in the same room and talk about all the things that we thought during the episode. I just loved so many of the things that Dr. Staley brought up. Just how kids recognize that if we don't talk about something, then it must be bad. And so arousal and sex and these feelings must be bad. How awesome that is that as parents, we can help prevent these harmful coping methods from coming into our kids' lives by just helping them know about bodies so that they're not feeling so curious about it, and helping them recognize that arousal and sex is good and beautiful, and that we get to be in control, that we don't have to automatically take care of the urges that we have. I just loved so many of those points. I also loved thinking about coping strategies for emotions, because we all have this. Just recently, I was telling my husband that I have a problem because I was just looking at all these deals and shopping, and it was kind of giving me like an adrenaline rush. And I was like, I am making a commitment right now that I'm not going to buy anything online until I talk to you about it. And that's been helpful. But it's just interesting to think about, like, what coping strategies do I use? And when I can be more mindful and think about it, I find that when I'm bored or when I'm feeling lonely, that's when I take out my phone and I start looking at things to purchase. So recognizing this, I want to do better now that I've re-listened to this episode, of recognizing that I'm feeling lonely and taking the chance to connect with someone instead of going shopping. I also loved this quote. Dr. Cameron Staley said, "The life you want to live is just on the other side of discomfort." And I think that that is so powerful, because vulnerability and authenticity takes courage. It can be so scary. And I think you can step into it step by step, trying out little things, testing the waters, seeing if you can share more, but knowing that it's going to take courage, but the life you want is just on the other side. And I think sometimes we're so nervous about feeling uncomfortable. We're so nervous about rejection that we never even give our relationship the chance to flourish and become as deep as it can be. So I hope this week you're going to lean a little bit more into the discomfort. I loved how he talked about that we can be willing to pay the price for connection, even though it's uncomfortable, even though we might not like it. And I think that that's a powerful lesson for all of us, that sometimes uncomfortable things are actually the things that are going to stretch us and make us grow. They're the things that are going to deepen our relationships. They're the things that are going to help us reach goals and dreams that we never thought possible. So lean into that discomfort and do something out of your comfort zone. That's also going to bring spark and life into your relationship. There's so many great things that can happen when we lean into discomfort. One last thing I wanted to bring up. I loved when he talked about that if you can't talk about it, you probably shouldn't do it. And I know for me, there are definitely times in our sexual relationship where I just didn't have the courage to say, "Oh, I don't like that," or "I would prefer this." And I think that that's a really powerful thing to start to practice, talking about the things that we want, and also being able to talk about the things that we're not comfortable with. Because if you can't talk about it, your partner is not going to know. They can't read your mind. And if you can't talk about it and you want to try something new, then that's not okay to just try it, because you need to get the consent of your partner and to know if that's something that is going to be okay with them to move forward and try. I just think that principle is so powerful on so many different levels. I know that this was a lot longer of an episode than usual, but it was so good. And I hope that you learned and took away a lot of great things that will help deepen your relationship and your connection. And don't forget, this is your very last chance to get on my email list so you don't miss my super big deal on my online course that will be going live in a couple months. And you get such a big discount, but you're going to get everything that someone else who pays full price is going to get. So make sure and hop on my email list so you don't miss the email that's going out tomorrow. Thank you to all of you who listen and join me on this journey, and to our Ladies Talking Love team who make the podcast possible. Thanks to our sound wizard, Kimberly Demers, and our miscellaneous task was Jana Norman. As always, thanks for talking love.